I've treated hundreds of patients and trained thousands of healthcare professionals over my 15-year career. And one thing I've learned through that experience is that most people are really confused about supplements, or they lack a clear strategy or plan for how to use supplements to improve their health. That's why I created Adapt Naturals. It's a supplement line designed to add back in what the modern world has squeezed out and help you feel and perform your best. Our ancestors' diets were rich in the essential vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients we need for optimal function. But today, thanks to declining soil quality, a growing toxic burden, and other challenges in the modern world, most of us are not getting enough of these critical nutrients. I formulated Adapt Naturals using the principles of evolutionary biology and modern research to fill the nutrient gaps that we face today and replicate the nutrient intakes found in an optimal ancestral diet. Our flagship offering is called the Core Plus Bundle, a daily stack of 5 products that gives you everything you need each day, from essential vitamins and minerals like B12, folate, magnesium, and vitamin D, to phytonutrients like bioflavonoids, carotenoids, and beta-glucans. You can also order the products in the bundle separately if that works better for your needs. The Adapt Naturals products are made from the highest quality, food-based, or bioidentical ingredients. From cellular and immune health to brain and nervous system support to blood sugar and heart health, we've got you covered. Your supplement cupboard is about to get a lot smaller. We also created an app called Core Reset to help you get your nutrition, sleep, movement, and stress management dialed in. Because no matter how good our supplements are, and they are really good, you can't supplement yourself out of a bad diet and lifestyle. The best part is that you get this app at no additional cost when you order the Core Plus bundle. Head over to adaptnaturals.com, that's ADAPT naturals.com, to learn more and start feeling and performing your best. Hey everybody, Chris Kresser here. Welcome to another episode of Revolution Health Radio. The latest statistics suggest that up to 50 million Americans are living with an autoimmune disease today at a cost of almost $90 billion a year. New autoimmune diseases are being discovered every year. I think the list is over 80 distinct conditions now, and they are very poorly served by the conventional medical establishment. I've seen this firsthand as a functional medicine clinician with almost 15 years of experience treating patients with autoimmune disease. The typical treatments are drugs that just suppress the symptoms, like steroids. And although these can be necessary and even life-saving in some situations, it's clear that they are not addressing the root cause of autoimmunity, which is really what we need to be doing if we want to get a handle on this alarming growth of this condition. So I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Akil Palanisamy as my guest. He's been a guest on Revolution Health Radio before. He's a Harvard-trained physician who practices integrative and functional medicine, blending his conventional medical expertise with holistic approaches, including functional medicine and Ayurveda. And Akil and I see eye to eye on a lot of things, and I especially like his approach to autoimmunity. I think it's balanced, it's evidence-based, and it's really geared towards helping people to address the root causes of their condition so that they can recover their health and live a full and vibrant life. So in this show, we're going to talk about his new book called The Tiger Protocol, which is an integrative 5-step program for treating and healing autoimmune disease. And we'll talk about TIGER, as you probably gathered, is an acronym. So we'll talk about what those letters stand for, what some of his most important recommendations are from his decades of experience treating autoimmune patients with autoimmune conditions, and some simple and practical strategies that you can use at home for improving your quality of life if you are someone who is dealing with an autoimmune disease. So I really enjoyed the conversation. I think you will as well. Let's dive in. Dr. Akil, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Chris, for inviting me back.
So I want to talk about your new book, The Tiger Protocol, an integrative 5-step program to treat and heal your autoimmunity. It's out on May 9th. I've always had great respect for your work, and autoimmunity is a problem that is unfortunately not going away, and in fact, The number of people that are diagnosed with autoimmune disease seems to rise every year. The number of autoimmune diseases themselves seems to increase every year. And
Yes.
my perspective is, and I'm sure you agree, is that it is one of the health conditions that is most poorly treated by the conventional medicine establishment. So if anything is ripe for a functional medicine approach, it's autoimmunity. So I'm really excited to dive into this with you. And maybe you could start by telling everyone what led you to write this book in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So you're totally right, Chris. Us in medicine we're not very skilled at treating quality of life issues or treating root causes. And so in autoimmune disease, we have wonderful medications, drugs that suppress the immune system, steroids, they can be life-saving. But then, beyond that, there's not much that's offered. And patients are really hungry, as you know, for integrative solutions, for diet and lifestyle recommendations. And so in my practice, it just organically evolved that I started seeing more and more autoimmune patients. And, over the past 20 years, I've been practicing, I've created and fine-tuned this protocol. And then I saw, good results in terms of improving immune function, reducing inflammation, helping quality of life. And therefore, I wanted to put it all together in the book so more people could learn about it.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to jump right into some of the potential root causes of autoimmunity that I think some folks are not even aware of, because again, it's the conventional treatment is usually just suppressing the symptoms with drugs, and as you pointed out, there is a case for that. There are situations, for example, where someone who is having a very severe Crohn's disease flare, might need medication to sort of quell that flare and get them back to a point where they can address these longer term issues. Or another example that comes to mind is someone who has Graves' disease and
Yes.
is in a thyroid storm. That can be fatal, right? So you want to, drugs can be very necessary in that situation. But generally, there's very little exploration or discussion about what these root causes are. So in your book, you talk about environmental toxins as a growing literature linking a whole range of toxins to immune disruption and autoimmunity. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Tiger protocol, is the acronym. So T is for toxins, and I'm putting that first because I feel like it's the hidden biggest driver that a lot of people don't think about. So in the book, I review 20 different categories of toxins that have been associated with increased risk of autoimmunity. So heavy metals, endocrine disrupting chemicals, pesticides, BPA, waterborne toxins, air pollution, PFCs, PCBs. So, each of them individually conveys a increased risk of autoimmunity. So when you start combining them, the studies have shown that most people have over 100 or up, between 100 to 200 levels of significant toxins, then they have synergistic effects. And we're starting to see now some research about that, because we need to know how all of these factors are working together, because that's the reality. We're all exposed to chronic low-level accumulation of multiple, probably hundreds of toxins. And that is really a huge factor in driving oxidative stress, driving inflammation, and driving autoimmunity.
Absolutely. And it's as you said, we're really just kind of scratching the surface of understanding the synergistic effects of these compounds. And
Yes.
up until relatively recently, the study of toxicology was mostly concerned with extreme, acute toxicity.
Right.
And we didn't even really understand what the impacts of low-level chronic exposure were, nor did we understand that those impacts are often quite different than the impacts of acute toxicity. They're not just, I think toxicologists just assume that, with lower exposure, you just get sort of junior versions of the impacts that you get at higher exposure. But it turns out that that's not true, and they can be totally different and sometimes even opposite in some cases. So Yeah, this is, to me, this is like a major problem that unfortunately is difficult to avoid if we're living
Yes.
in the industrial world, which many
Mhm.
of almost everyone listening to this podcast is. It's not something that we can just avoid.
Yes. No, you're totally right. And I think the perfect example of that is glyphosate, because the acute toxicity studies have been done, and that's why there's controversy, because those scientists are saying the acute toxicity, it has to be very high dose. But with autoimmune disease, there are two mechanisms that are not being well studied. One is that glyphosate inhibits your cytochrome P450 liver enzymes, which are critical for detox. So it impairs the clearance of those all the environmental toxins. And then secondly, glyphosate came to market as an antibiotic, many years ago. It causes a decline in beneficial bacteria, predisposes to dysbiosis. So I think these kind of things need more study in terms of the long-term effects of that. I agree with you. That's a direction we need to pursue.
So even though we can't completely eliminate our exposure to these toxins in most cases, what are some of the recommendations you suggest in terms of mitigating or minimizing exposure?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's try to do both, try to reduce your exposure to toxins and then try to enhance detoxification. And then the first thing to remember is mindset, because I don't want people to be depressed or overwhelmed. That's not my goal. I want people to approach it, because it's easy to get overwhelmed with the mountain of research. But we all have our own detox capacities. And in terms of reducing exposures, I think purifying your drinking water, like getting a really good filter, is beneficial. Purifying your air with a home filter, which I know you've talked about extensively. There was an interesting study about your shoes. So removing your shoes upon entering the house actually is beneficial, because on the bottoms of your shoes, studies have found lead, pesticides, harmful bacteria. So if you're leaving them at the door, then they're not going to be tracked into your house. So that's something little bit, less well known. I think some other strategies are reducing your exposure to heavy metals, especially mercury and lead. And using healthy like cooking vessels, and you have to also look at your personal care products. The environmental working group has a lot of guidelines there. And finally, like the household chemicals that we're all exposed to, cleaning materials at home, and then also indoor air, yeah, is very important.
Yeah, a lot to consider, but there's a
Yes.
lot of, both Akil and I have articles about this, and, chip away at it. I think starting with the biggest offenders, the personal care products, because,
Yes.
our skin is one of the barrier systems in our body. But what a lot of people don't realize is the gut is actually a much less permeable barrier than the skin, because
Hmm.
from an evolutionary perspective, we were at risk of dying from eating something that was toxic. So we evolved mechanisms to the gut evolved mechanisms to keep toxins out. There weren't really any examples of skin creams that were
Mm.
happening
Hmm.
millions of hundreds of thousands of years ago. Our ancestors weren't putting things on their skin, so the skin never evolved that kind of discernment, you could say.
Mm.
So whatever we put
Yes.
on our skin actually has, I think, a much greater potential for causing toxicity, and those, a lot of personal care products with chemicals fall into that category.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So I want to talk a little bit about the next, which is the I in
Hmm.
tiger, and this
Hmm.
is healing infections. I mean, I think most recently the way that this has been on people's radar is with COVID and SARS coronavirus 2, and the discussion around how infection with SARS coronavirus 2 can perhaps predispose people to autoimmunity. In
Hmm.
fact, this shouldn't have been a surprise, right? Because we have a
Right.
long history of literature linking all kinds of different infections, not just SARS coronavirus 2, but all kinds of other viruses and bacteria and fungi, et cetera. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think infections are, a really big factor. And in terms of the overall approach, I try to focus on the terrain of the body, the internal environment, making your body inhospitable to infections rather than focusing excessively on the germ or the microbe. So we do include like antimicrobial herbs and spices in the protocol, but I think focusing on the terrain is really the emphasis. And you're exactly right. Yeah, many different categories of organisms have been associated with increased risk of autoimmunity. So bacteria, of course, in the microbiome. So dysbiosis, which is the decline in beneficial keystone species and overgrowth of potential pathogens. There's also the virome, which is the community of viruses that is very interesting, new research, early research about the connection with autoimmunity. And then there's the mycobiome, which is all the fungi, like Candida is the most well-known one, but there is pretty good research that can play a role in certain people. And then we have parasites and archaea as well. So I think there's this broad range of different microbes, and the focus is, make your body inhospitable, make your gut inhospitable, and then try to include some of these natural antimicrobial compounds like spices and herbs to support that process.
Yeah, you and I have agreed on this for a long time. I think
Right.
it's the pendulum. I think went too far in the other direction with
Hmm.
we when we germ theory and the discovery of that germs cause disease was perhaps one of the most important breakthroughs in the
Hmm.
history of science and medicine. So
Yes.
we're
Yeah.
not disputing that, of course, but the idea that we should then that all microbes are harmful and we need to create as sterile of an environment as possible, whether we're talking about inside of our bodies or in our in our external environment. I mean, we now know that that's not a good approach either, and that
Hmm.
through the hygiene hypothesis or the old friends hypothesis and the idea that these microbes actually play beneficial roles, and
Hmm.
we could even consider ourselves more of an ecosystem than an individual in that
Right.
sense.
Exactly.
It's so important that we preserve the health of that ecological community. And I love what you just said, doing that with combination of diet and probiotics and prebiotics and spices and herbs and things that essentially, if you keep the garden healthy,
Exactly.
because then in that garden, the weeds and the other pathogens will be less likely to take over.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So that's a good segue into G, which is gut health, because
Yes.
gut health, as we just discussed, is important for protecting us against infections. It's also important for helping us to detoxify toxins, which was which was T. So
Hmm.
it seems to me that it's funny because G is the center of this word tiger, but it's
Mm.
also playing a central role
Hmm.
in this entire approach, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You and I have been speaking for a long time about how the gut is foundational and affects every organ system. So many people have heard about the microbiome, but in the book, I really wanted to do a deep dive. And so I cover 5 of the keystone species that are very important and actually make up a huge percentage of the microbiome. Like, for example, Bacteroides can be up to 25% of all species in a healthy microbiome. And it's a pathobiont, which means that it's highly dependent on an environment, highly pH dependent in the intestine, and can be either beneficial or very harmful depending on the environment. So Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, which is another keystone species, up to 15% of all species in healthy microbiome. Very important in COVID. That's kind of helped make it more well known that it seems to play a role in the immune system, in inflammation, and then of course there's Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus, which most people have heard about, but I think that they do play a role in immune health. And then finally, there's Akkermansia, which is Akkermansia muciniphila, that is now being well known for its role in metabolism and blood sugar and healthy weight. And there is some controversy about the role of Akkermansia in Autoimmunity, because certain conditions, specifically multiple sclerosis, there's 3 studies that showed increased presence of akkermansia, but there are researchers who argue that is more a result of a disrupted gut microbiome and not a cause of it, which is my view. That akkermansia, in most studies, because of the remodeling it triggers for the gut mucus and gut lining, leads to an increase in gut, mucus thickness. And so I think it's really a beneficial bacteria to try to raise up through foods. So I think, yeah, I just wanted to kind of teach people more about what are the individual organisms and how to support each of them with certain foods.
Great. Yeah, and that's not uncommon. Some people would make the argument that cholesterol has a
Mm,
similar function as a repair substance. I
mhm.
think there is some merit to that, but when you see something elevated, it doesn't mean that that thing, it's confusion of correlation and causation, right? Which is a
Right.
fundamental thing that we hopefully learn when we're studying research methodology,
Mhm,
but it is difficult to tease out sometimes,
mhm.
that chain of causality. So yeah, these bacterium, it's really, even just in the time you and I have been doing this work, Akil, that
Mhm.
we've learned a lot more,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
particularly about the anaerobic species, which we didn't really initially have insight into because they couldn't easily be cultured.
Yes,
Now
exactly.
the PC, all of the new methodologies for testing make that a lot easier, and we found that
Mhm.
these are actually in many cases the major players that we didn't even know about before.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, totally.
So the E is learn to eat right. So this is something that people will probably be most familiar with when it comes to just general health and well-being. But autoimmunity, people with autoimmunities may require, eating right for them might be somewhat different than eating right for people without autoimmunity. So how are you approaching this? Because there's obviously so many different ways of looking at the right diet for someone with autoimmune disease.
Yes, absolutely. So this is my favorite topic. I really believe in food as medicine, and the book has tons of recipes from my kitchen, that I use. So the way I approach it is I've broken it up into 2 diets. One is the phase 1 diet, which is more of a elimination diet, more restrictive, and then there's the phase 2 diet, which is designed to boost your microbiome diversity. It's more of a long-term diet. I know, this is something you and I have seen in our practice, that sometimes patients end up staying on a very restrictive diet for too long, like the AIP diet, and then losing some of that beneficial diversity in the microbiome, which is harmful in the long run. So you do need to start with an elimination diet, so I talk about, some of the like differences between food sensitivity versus food intolerance versus food allergy. And then the main way that my elimination diet, the phase 1, differs from, for example, the AIP, is that I include mung beans, because mung beans are unique among all legumes in Ayurveda, the system of medicine from India, because they're considered to be the most easily digestible. They're part of a dish called khichdi, which is a medicinal dish in Ayurveda. And then I also allow like gluten-free grains. So if people tolerate rice or quinoa or other gluten-free grains, then I don't often see that is inflammatory for people. There are, of course, a subset of patients that have to be off all grains, and you have to kind of investigate that, but I don't think it's automatic for everyone. So that way, you're getting a little more flexibility even with the elimination diet. And then the phase 2 diet is really all about how to reintroduce the prebiotic foods. So the different categories of prebiotic foods, including polyphenols. So foods that are rich in polyphenols are often the best tolerated, even by patients with SIBO or dysbiosis. And then I go through the top foods that contain inulin, resistant starch, and all 3 types of resistant starch. the arabinogalactans, the various other types of prebiotic foods, and also emphasize fermented foods in the long-term diet, but I really place more emphasis on the prebiotic foods because I feel like fermented foods are, recognized and emphasized, but we have a lot of research on the health benefits of, getting these prebiotic foods that you can tolerate into your diet.
Excellent. Yeah. And it's funny anecdote. When I did a 30-day meditation retreat in Thailand when I was in my 20s, and the only thing we were allowed to eat during that time was khichdi. So I
Oh,
have
wow. Great.
in the evenings we had the midday meal. We had no food in the evening, then we had a light breakfast. But so I have this taste of khichdi is like deeply ingrained in my psyche. Even right now, if I think about it, it's vivid, and I really like it. Like there was quite a while where I couldn't eat a bowl of khichdi
Sure.
because I was just so tired of it. But yeah, it's interesting because at that time I was struggling with my health and my gut health, but and I couldn't really eat any other legumes or beans. But the
Interesting.
khichdi didn't cause any problem for me, which it
Hmm.
was one of my biggest hesitations of doing that retreat, because I was like, oh my
Mm.
gosh, I'm going to be eating legumes every day. This is going to wreak havoc. But it didn't. So I find that interesting that you allow that even on the phase one part of the diet.
Hmm. Yeah, that fascinating story. Yeah, many Ayurvedic hospitals in India, the entire diet that people eat for like a 21 or 28-day cleanse is khichdi. So that's all they're
Yeah, it's the
eating, and then
khichdi
plenty of
cleanse.
ghee. Yeah, and ghee as well.
Yeah, we did add some ghee, because if all I was eating was I did lose quite a bit of weight, as you can
Oh,
imagine.
okay.
But I
Yep.
think the ghee helped to make that less less severe than it would have been otherwise. If you've listened to this show for a while, you know that I'm a super active guy. Depending on the time of year, I'm either skiing, mountain biking, hiking, backpacking, surfing, or lifting weights on most days of the week. I also live in a really dry climate at high elevation. For these reasons, I pay a lot of attention to hydration. I've learned the hard way what happens when I get dehydrated, and I know how important hydration is to overall health. But hydration isn't just about drinking water, it's about water plus electrolytes. This is where Element comes in. It's a combination of electrolytes like sodium, potassium, and magnesium in easy to use individual packets that you just add right to your water bottle. And unlike most electrolyte products on the market, Element is free of sugar and artificial junk. I drink Element every day, and it's made a huge difference in how I feel. Even with my training and profession, I don't think I realized how often I was dehydrated before I made Element part of my daily routine. If you'd like to try it, the folks at Element have an exclusive offer for my podcast listeners. You can get a free sample pack with one of each of the 8 flavors Element sells when you purchase any Element product. This is perfect for anyone who wants to try all of the flavors or who wants to introduce a friend to Element. Just go to kresser.co/element, that's LMNT, to place an order and take advantage of this offer. Vitamin C is a critical nutrient for immune function and antioxidant protection. Yet most people don't get enough in their diet, and most vitamin C supplements contain synthetic forms, GMO, sugar, or allergens like soy or corn. This is why I recommend whole food forms of vitamin C, which contain the full spectrum of vitamin C activity without GMOs or other junk. And my favorite whole food vitamin C product is Essential C from Paleo Valley. It's made with 3 of the most potent vitamin C rich superfoods on the planet, one of which is 120 times more potent than an orange. Nothing synthetic, no weird questionable ingredients, just food. Right now, they're offering my community an exclusive 15% off discount. Just go to paleovalley.com/Chris and use the code Kresser15 to get 15% off. All right, so the last one, and this is one of great interest to me, and
Hmm.
is rest and rebalance. So yeah, there's 2 R's there that
Yep.
you're combining into one. I will say, from my 15 years of experience now working with autoimmune patients, that I think this is the most underrated one of the bunch, and that and one where I have often seen people make great progress when everything else has not yielded results. So I'm curious to hear about your experience with this, and what you suggest in this category.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think it's absolutely fundamental and a key part of immune health, inflammation, and just longevity, overall. When I start talking about stress, usually my patients like eyes glaze over and they just kind of, fade, like zone out. But I've learned to kind of give people options because I'm a big fan of meditation. There is research showing that meditation reduces inflammation, lowers levels of your C-reactive protein and tumor necrosis factor alpha. It helps your gut. It transforms your brain through neuroplasticity, literally grows your brain. Your hippocampus gets bigger, frontal cortex gets bigger, white and gray matter both increase in size. So if you are okay with meditation, it's unsurpassed in terms of like health promoting benefits, but it's not for everyone. And the studies show that there are many different ways to climb the mountain and tackle stress. So things that are beneficial include psychotherapy, guided imagery, prayer for certain people, gratitude practices, yoga or tai chi. So there's a lot of different ways to come at it. The main thing is I recommend people find something they can do every day. So something that they enjoy, something they can do, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes every day. I think it's really key to continuously be clearing out stress from our body and preventing it from exerting its negative impacts, if it builds up to a high level.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to put in a plug here for having fun
Yes.
as an
Yes.
antidote to stress, and that's one of my preferred stress busting approaches. I started meditating when I was 17, so
Oh, wow.
I'm 48 now, so it's been over 30 years, and I'm huge proponent of meditation, absolutely, and I think I agree with you. It's unsurpassed in because it's such a full and rich practice that can support us in so many ways. And I think that I like talking about fun as a stress management modality because you rarely hear that. It's like
Yes. Yes.
it's usually like, oh God, I got to sit down and meditate, or I have to like do really slow movements, and Tai Chi or Qigong or deep breathing, all of which are great and really helpful. But
Hmm.
even just doing something you really enjoy, or laughing, playing with your pets or your kids, those release endorphins. And you talk about this as well, that those endorphins have a regulatory role on the immune system. It's like the whole principle of Patch Adams, right? If people who've seen that movie.
Yeah, yeah. And I recall you and I led a retreat on burnout for physicians, many years ago before the pandemic. And I remember how you spoke about play and having fun. And, it was really kind of a shock, I think, to these physicians to hear that. But
Yeah.
it was very great, I think, that you opened their eyes to that because it's so powerful.
Absolutely. And it's fun, right? Having
Yes,
fun is fun.
exactly. Right, right.
It might be
Yeah.
easier to convince some of our patients to have more fun
Yes.
than it is to get them to meditate, right?
Oh,
So,
for sure. Yes, for
yeah.
sure.
So, I want to talk about a few other things from your book that I really appreciated, and I think can play a significant role. One is the role of the oral microbiome. So this is something that's definitely gained more attention. I don't think really very many people were talking about this at all, even 10 years ago, much less 20. But now there's quite a bit of research that suggests that the health of our gums and our teeth and what's happening in our mouth can really actually have a major impact on our immune function.
Yes, for sure. I think the oral microbiome is now being increasingly connected to heart disease, diabetes, cancer, infections, and autoimmunity. And I was very kind of surprised by how strong the research is. The oral microbiome is our second biggest microbiome, so about 6 billion bacteria, whereas the GI microbiome is about 40 billion. And we swallow probably on average between 800 billion oral bacteria per day on the low end to more than 1 trillion oral bacteria per day, every day. And there are no breaks, there are no days off. And so that's why, it's so important. What's the makeup of those those microbes. And there is also leaky mouth syndrome, just like you have leaky gut syndrome. You can have increased intestinal permeability. You can have dysbiosis in the oral microbiome, which is increases of pathogens, decline of the keystone species. And so to strengthen the oral microbiome, there's many strategies, but from Ayurveda, I think oil pulling is a very beneficial practice, and also tongue scraping, where you are cleaning your tongue either with a toothbrush or a tongue cleaner every day. That also reduces quite a bit of the pathogenic bacteria. And then from the diet point of view, I'm a big fan of green tea, which is a prebiotic that supports both your oral and intestinal microbiome. So I just tell people to swish around green tea in their mouth before swallowing, and it gets to those oral bacteria. And then it goes into your gut and has other benefits too. And I'm a big fan of matcha because you get the highest levels of the catechins, which are the antioxidants that are active and prebiotic. So I think that's a good way with diet and lifestyle practices like those Ayurvedic techniques. And then finally, we do have to talk about like root canals, and that's potentially an area that's can be a real unrecognized driver for autoimmunity. So not for everybody, but for some people, they can be a hidden nidus of infections, contribute to inflammation. There's a lot better technology now, certain like the 3D cone beam X-rays to investigate, and working with specialists that can look and see if that's an issue for you. But there's so much from the oral microbiome that's relevant to health.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's something that I think we're going to just learn more and more about as our understanding improves. And I think unfortunately, in my experience, it's still, I think the understanding of how this contributes is a little bit ahead of people's ability to access, advanced dental and periodontal care that is consistent with these newer with this newer understanding and principles. But that will change over time. So hopefully sooner rather than later.
Yes.
Another topic I want to cover is one that I know you have been a big advocate for, and since your first book, and something you've just often spoken about, especially in the context of herbs and spices, which are a big part of Ayurveda, is polyphenols and the phytonutrients that we get from plant foods like vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, and of course, herbs and spices, which are among the most nutrient-dense foods that we can eat.
Yeah. So I think polyphenols are really central to my phase 2 diet because of their anti-inflammatory benefits, their prebiotic effects. And in the literature, there's actually published data about hundreds of foods and their polyphenol content. So I put that all together in tables going through every category. Like, for example, in fruits, elderberries, the highest in polyphenol, followed by blueberry and black currant. So elderberries is something that, of course, has benefits for your immune system as well. And in vegetables, it's capers, black olives, and green olives that are like way above most other vegetables. This is all looking at like 100 grams of serving size. And then with herbs and spices, there's clove powder, dried peppermint. Those are both like 3 times the amount of polyphenols as the other compounds. And so so like also ground flax seeds and chestnuts are the most rich polyphenols in terms of nuts, beans, and seeds. So I think that, it's beneficial because many people with SIBO cannot tolerate the inulin-rich foods, which are kind of high FODMAP foods. Many people with autoimmune disease don't tolerate legumes, which are incredibly good sources of prebiotic and resistant starch. But if you can't tolerate them, you can go to the polyphenols and choose from, these lists, whatever you can tolerate that will really help boost your microbiome diversity.
Yeah, I'm excited about this, and I've appreciated your balanced approach with on this topic over the years. I think again, this is something you and I agree on because, on the one hand, you have plant-based diet advocates who believe that we can get everything we need from plants and we don't need to eat animals. And on the other end, more recently, you have the carnivore camp that
Hmm.
believe that there's, there's nothing that we need from plants. And my way of looking at it, which I think you agree with, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that the best diet for most people is a combination of both plant and animal foods. And
Agreed.
one of the reasons for that is these phytonutrients, and
Hmm.
not just polyphenols, but lignans and soluble fibers, beta glucan, all the interesting compounds that now science is really shining the light on in terms of their health benefits. They're not essential in the sense that vitamins and minerals are, that we literally cannot live without. We'll develop acute diseases and die. But if you want to live a good life and a healthy life and a
Hmm.
long life, they appear to be very important.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
So the last thing I want to talk about is some of the more maybe experimental therapies, we could say, things that are being studied now. There may not be as much research on them yet, but they have some interesting mechanisms. There's already been some interesting pilot studies or bigger studies, and anecdotally, patients are getting good results with them. So I'm thinking about things like vagus nerve stimulation with a PONS device and some of the other therapies you mentioned later in your book. So yeah, maybe pick a couple that you think are most promising that you're using with patients or that you like, and I'd love to hear about those.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is exciting because there are a lot of things coming on the horizon that I think will be very beneficial. Yes, you mentioned the PONS device, so that's very interesting. It uses a portable tongue stimulation device that uses neuroplasticity, so it sends signals through the tongue back to the brain, and it's now FDA approved for patients with MS, multiple sclerosis. So improves their balance and other things. So for someone with MS, I think that's already available as an FDA approved option through their neurologist. I think in terms of other therapies, I'm excited about stem cells. I think it's a bit of a wild west right now in terms of just lack of regulation, but there's some promising companies that are researching stem cells. So there's a company from Australia that is working on a stem cell infusion for patients with autoimmune disease. So they studied that in rheumatoid arthritis patients that were refractory, meaning they didn't respond to even the strongest drugs and IV drugs. But a single stem cell infusion actually was significantly beneficial for 10 months. And when compared to a placebo, I think stem cells can help with the repair and regeneration of damaged tissue and inflammation. So that's some research that I'm following quite closely. And then with the vagus nerve electrical stimulation, yeah, that's something that it's still new, but very promising research for rheumatoid arthritis and for inflammatory bowel disease, that it helps with reducing inflammation. It's a small implantable device. It's getting smaller and smaller in the next generation, but exciting research about the role of that in a non-drug therapy to help with bringing down inflammation. And of course, you can all. I'm also a big fan of activating your vagus nerve in every other way that you can, like cold showers, exposure to cold, singing, oil pulling, all of those things.
Yeah, a lot of the stress management techniques we talked about earlier can have an effect on the vagus nerve as well. And
Right.
there's an interesting device called the Sensate. Have you worked with that at all,
No.
Akil? I'll send you some information on it later, but it's you hang it around your neck while you're lying down or sitting
Huh.
down, and it rests right on your sternum, like around
Oh.
above the where the vagus nerve. It vibrates, and that vibration sends a pulse, through the bones that
Mm.
induces a parasympathetic response, and
Hmm.
it does it in rhythm with pre-programmed music that you listen
Oh.
to in
Okay.
headphones. So I find it to be very relaxing. I've been kind of testing it out and using it lately. There's some really cool new things, becoming available. I think that in a non-invasive way and in a way that is pretty relaxing, stimulate the vagus nerve.
Yes, yes. Have you heard about the Apollo Neuro device? I know many of
Yes.
my patients are using that with good
Yeah,
success for parasympathetic activation.
exactly. So that's another good example. And not a lot of people have access to this, but sauna is
Yes. Yep.
and red light therapy are other interesting pleiotropic modalities that I think have a lot of beneficial effects for the immune system.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
And again, feels good, right? It's
Yes,
like
exactly. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of treatments or modalities that are enjoyable to do,
right.
you know?
Yeah, and they have so many multiple benefits for different
Exactly.
conditions, for your longevity, for your mental health.
Yeah, I use that word pleiotropic just now for people who aren't familiar with it. That's
Mm,
essentially what it means is, benefits other than what, in the context of studying drugs or genes, which is where the word came out of it means benefits other than perhaps the primary or intended benefit. So if
right.
statin drugs were thought to work by lowering cholesterol, but when they talk about the pleiotropic benefits of statins, they mean other effects that aren't related to lowering cholesterol. But in the context that we're talking about it, it means pretty much every part of the tiger protocol is pleiotropic, right? Like if
Right.
you if you help your gut, it's going to have multiple benefits, not just related to your gut. If you do
Hmm.
stress management, relaxation, it's going to have multiple benefits. If you reduce your exposure to toxins, it's going to have multiple benefits. If you
Yep.
get in the sauna, it's going to have multiple benefits. So it's like an upward spiral, right?
Hmm.
Creating that, or the rising tide that lifts all boats, you could say.
Yes.
Great. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Akil, and I love the
Yeah,
book. I think
likewise.
it's a phenomenal resource for anybody who has autoimmune disease. I highly recommend picking up a copy. And where can people learn more about the book and about your work in general?
Yeah, so it's sold, wherever books are sold, and I've partnered with a number of companies to put together more than $1,000 worth of discounts and bonuses and special offers. So the best way to access that is through my website, which is drakil.com, DOCTORAKIL.com, and you can pre-order and then enter your name to get instant access to those discounts. And I know a lot of people have been taking advantage of those and finding benefit already.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Please send your questions to chriskresser.com/podcast question, and we'll see you next time. That's the end of this episode of Revolution Health Radio. If you appreciate the show and want to help me create a healthier and happier world, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really do make a difference. If you'd like to ask a question for me to answer on a future episode, you can do that at chriskresser.com/podcast question. You can also leave a suggestion for someone you'd like me to interview there. If you're on social media, you can follow me at twitter.com/chriskresser or facebook.com/chriskresserlac. I post a lot of articles and research that I do throughout the week there that never makes it to the blog or podcast, so it's a great way to stay abreast of the latest developments. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next time.